We go to the other thing and we turn off the sound. Once that kicks on. Hello. We are in the midst of getting together here. Needs to roll. There we go. All right. Now we should be okay. Can everybody hear me? Am I hearable? Seeable? Am I lovable? Let me still put that down just a little bit. Still getting this down. Hello, hello, hello. All right. I think we are ready to go. How many people do we have in here at the moment? If you're in here, leave a like. Leave a dislike, leave a like. Tell everybody that you think this is kind of awesome. Still says I have no viewers. That's a lie. I know that there's some of you in here. I'm doing some adjustments, as you can see, with the camera, trying to get it where... Well, see, even if I go back here, I'd have to take the computer with me. So it's going to be dependent upon comfort level, usually about mid-range, so get a nice view of the... I'm from Pittsburgh. I'm a Penguins fan, but I've been a Red Wings fan for a while, so there's a couple of years where the Pens and Detroit were going head-to-head were pretty awesome for me. Either way, I won. Speaking of sports, before we get started, we're still waiting for some people to get in here. Pirates are in a wild game. They're in a wild game right now, 6-4 with LA. So let's go Pirates. If anybody out there wants to kill the St. Louis Cardinals, as much as that would probably make me happy, don't do it. I don't want anybody going to jail over baseball. That'd be kind of stupid. Oh, yeah, I should probably share this link. Told you, we're still getting started here. And I should probably tweet this out, too. Tweet it. Just tweet it. Tweet it. Just tweet it. Tweet it. Tweet it. Tweet it. Tweet it. Tweet it. Cool. I should do it. We should have some more people coming in. We have 9 right now. Is that an owl lamp? Yes, it is. Owls are pretty cool.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, I have a guest back here. Probably pipe in from time to time. Greetings from Melbourne. Greetings from America. Greetings from Pennsylvania. Okay, I think we're good to go. I will try to either edit this whenever the video goes up on YouTube, the playback that is, and also, if I don't do that, I'll at least include an annotation as to where everybody should start. I am doing well, Gabriel. I'm going to push that back just a little bit because I'm going to have to keep on pushing it back and forth, and that's going to get annoying. I think by now everyone's used to there being a little bit of space with these, and I do a little bit of leaning here anyhow. That way I can see the chat. For those of you who haven't seen there's a stream that I mentioned that these sunglasses are not prescription. So it does actually impair my ability to see a little bit, which is kind of it defeats the purpose, I know. But up in the upper right-hand corner, you'll notice that there's a card up there that you can access. And that is for anybody who wishes to take advantage of the fan funding. And if you do so, I thank you very, very much. It is something that we do have running on the channel. I know some folks have asked me either on YouTube through messages, or mostly on the Cover Killer Nation Facebook page through messages, how to do that. So if you happen to be in here, click on that card in the upper right-hand corner, and you will have the ability to do that. And leave the if you're in here, put a like or a dislike down below the video, and it only takes about a second because it helps. Before we get started, that is something I want to talk to you guys about briefly. Is I know that Facebook has still been problematic, and we've talked about this a lot. But if you do view any of the videos on the channel, leave a like or a dislike. Just sort of do it automatically, because that definitely does help. And don't feel like you can only share this to your friends. You can share it to pages that allow you to do that, and onto websites and all that other junk. So definitely spread this stuff around. And the one thing I will ask is that, even if you disagree with me, watch the video to the end. I know some of them can get a little bit long, but that's all stuff that helps a lot. So let's get started. Oh, more comments below. Why is this backlog? There we go. Opeth played tonight in the UK Dreadlocks, and you missed it. That is a sin. What a freaking sinner. Man, oh man, why in the world would you do that? I'm kidding. I've missed them a couple times too recently, so I can't say anything. So greetings from America, greetings from the planet Earth, the Milky Way galaxy. If there's anybody that's not from the Milky Way galaxy, hello. I'm glad that you have chosen me for first contact. Don't kill me. I've been playing a lot of Duke Nukem, so I'm not going to say come yet, so that's kind of gross. Not sure what that would be in your native tongue anyway. So, oh, someone's at work now. Oh my gosh. Getting paid to rock out with CKN. Must be a cool job. Try whistling this. What do you do? That way I can do it. I would really like that. That'd be a great day job. Currently, I'm going through education for the insurance game. Fun. That's actually why this stream almost got canceled. So anyhow, oh, sacrificing for Sting and Paul Simon Dreadlocks. Nice. That's pretty cool. Heard good things about Sting's live show, as well as and Paul Simon, his remasters, especially the one that he just did for, I think, the 30th anniversary of Graceland, was really, really cool. It was a really neat remaster that they did for that. I think it was in 2013. Pretty cool little thing. So some of you are probably asking what the What If game is. It seemed like some of the folks over on the CKN page did know that. But the What If game is pretty simple. The What If game is asking a question about what if something happened or didn't happen. For example, and I will be very detailed with this, the example would be, what if Dave Mustaine is never kicked out of Metallica, or never leaves Metallica? Whenever he did, what would be the potential future outcome of not only Metallica, but of other bands that are included? And this can actually transform itself into a strange little universe. And this makes it into a strange little universe where you can have your own what if universe. And you can actually cross pattern a little bit. Like, for example, what if Randy Rhodes never dies, and what if Dave Mustaine never gets kicked out of Metallica? Does actually cross hairs a little bit. And I'll explain to you why that is. And remember, all of this is subjective. This is not objective whatsoever. This is kind of just where you think your thoughts would go. And I got this idea from a gentleman who does videos about how he would book or would have booked different eras of WWE storylines, such as the Nexus or the ending of the Undertaker streak. I completely disagree with his pick for who would end the streak, but that's neither here nor there. So at any rate, we're going to start with an easy one, and you're going to want to stick around to the end of the stream, so stay as long as you can, because I'll explain why these all have a bit of relevance to them and why your input is going to be so important in this. So what if Dave Mustaine never left Metallica? And what if Randy Rhodes never died? Let's actually do both of those in one, because they do cross streams in my What If universe. If Dave Mustaine never leaves Metallica, he's never kicked out, I believe that Metallica would obviously be kind of different whenever it comes to Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning. I still, though, believe that Dave Mustaine ends up out of the band by 1986. And the reason for that being that I think that Dave's own ego would still be the problem. And as we all know from how Megadeth was sort of a revolving door during its earlier years because of Dave's drinking and drug use, that Dave would essentially have just, him not leaving whenever, like right before the release of Kill 'Em All, would have just merely delayed the inevitable for a little while. So you might wonder, well, who do you get to replace Dave Mustaine in this situation? Well, Randy Rhodes, who didn't die, has now gotten fed up with Ozzy. So here you go. Now you have Randy Rhodes in Metallica, and you have Dave Mustaine going off to form Megadeth. This is all very critical. The timing is all exceptionally critical. The one thing I will say is that you do not get from this Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good. That album actually gets scrapped completely. And the very first album that you get from Megadeth ends up being Peace Sells, But Who's Buying? And it's a success for Dave, as it was, all things considered. But that is an important part of the chronology. You might wonder what happens to Ozzy in this case, and there's a couple things that could potentially happen. First of all, in this universe, I have no idea where Jakey Lee is. I assume that he has hooked up with another band. So who knows in this pattern, who really cares? Black Sabbath at this time has finished up their work with Ronnie James Dio. So the easy solution is that they go forth and actually bury the hatchet a little sooner than they obviously have. And we have a Black Sabbath reunion in the late 1980s, or at least one that's developing by the end of the 1980s. Or there is a brand new guitarist of Ozzy Osbourne's solo project, and it is not Zakk Wylde, because Zakk Wylde, of course, did not become a part of the band until the early part of the 90s with No More Tears. So either we have a new guitarist, and the whole entire timeline gets a little bit screwed up. Zakk Wylde might never actually be the guitar player of Ozzy. It's a strange thought, because essentially Kirk Hammett is not in the picture at this stage of the game. And I want you to remember something. Whenever we do these what-if games, if somebody is omitted, it isn't because of dislike. It isn't because of displeasure toward their work, or because I feel that their impact on the band was negative. This is just the way in which history works, and history sometimes does not include individuals. Now, with Randy Rhodes in Metallica, Master of Puppets still occurs. Master of Puppets, though, is sonically quite a bit different. Perhaps not quite the same legendary album that you might expect, but with Randy Rhodes heading some of the shredding duties, it certainly is competent from the guitar standpoint. Meanwhile, Cliff Burton, while on tour, still sadly dies. This is critical for a couple of different reasons. The first reason why this is critical is because of Megadeth. It's critical because Cliff Burton's death was the inspiration for In My Darkest Hour. And that was a critical component to why So Far, So Good, So What is actually a really competent album, even though a lot of people disagree. And it also affects how Injustice for All comes to be with Randy Rhodes, which also is the first real scent of any sort of dissent, considering there is a change in sound. Once again, we're not suggesting Randy Rhodes is difficult to work with, but you're throwing somebody else into the ring, and it can cause some difficulty. Jason Newsted still comes over from Flotsam and Jetsam, by the way, which is, I still could see Jason coming to Metallica to be a real shame for Flotsam and Jetsam, because Doomsday for the Deceiver is so highly regarded, and then it seemed like their material thereafter has been largely ignored, which is a shame, because their first 4 albums are pretty damn good, and really even their latter releases, like their more recent releases, aren't bad either. They're kind of underappreciated and underloved. If you need to sneeze, just go ahead. You're not good.
Just sneeze.
You seem like you would hold it back.
No, I guess you're doing it speed over.
Yes, we don't need that. Now, the Black Album still happens. The Black Album still happens with Randy Rhodes, by the way, and it does not become the best-selling heavy metal record of all time. Not based around the fact that the material is all that different. It just doesn't have the same impact. Plus, at this stage of the game, there gets to be some tension, notably because Randy is not too sold on Bob Rock. So, after the accident that involves James Hetfield, which still does occur, unfortunately, Randy decides to leave. Now, you might wonder, where does Kurt factor in all this? Well, he's been in Exodus this whole entire time, and Exodus has actually become a part of the Big Four, which is now the Big Five in this strange world that we've concocted. He's able to stick around with Exodus until 1990, and then he leaves Exodus and decides to go solo. So he has his own solo band entitled just Hammett at this period of time. He comes on board for the Load and Reload sessions. Dave, meanwhile, is still going fine with Megadeth, and that timeline remains largely unaltered. That's kind of what we mean right there. As for Randy Rhodes, he eventually ends up back with Ozzy Osbourne later on in the 1990s. Zakk Wylde gets discovered for Black Label Society as opposed to for his work in Ozzy Osbourne. It's a slow ascent, but Randy Rhodes unfortunately dies in this little fantasy in the late 1990s based around an accident similar to his actual death. So really, we just delayed it for about almost 20 years. And Zakk Wylde takes over for him. And now the timeline is largely the way that you look at it. But the impact is what's really the difference maker here. The impact is that now we have the Big Five as opposed to the Big Four. Because let's face it, the Big Four sounds snappy, but it could have been the Big Four, the Big Six, the Big Three, the Pick Seven, the Elusive Eight, whatever. So there you go. I mean, it's a strange little conundrum right there. That's how the game sort of works. Why is this all important? Because it may become a series. Maybe something we do on the channel. And it may be one where, unlike these streams and unlike my traditional videos, you may not see me on camera very much. There might be some actual editing involved with this, because I want to try to make these a little bit shorter than what I just did, because I'm fairly certain I tackled that in about 10 minutes, give or take. And I would like videos like that, if I were to do anything like that, to maybe be within the 5 to 6 minute mark. So, let's tackle another one. And Dreadox, you're talking about Ozzy solo work. I'm a huge fan of No More Tears. So having Zakk Wylde be deferred into that band until later on also means removing probably my favorite solo Ozzy album. I saw one that said, what would have happened if the Beatles never would have broken up? Interesting idea. One that is very, very short. in my opinion, because the Beatles, if they wouldn't have broken up in the late 60s, they would have broken up in the 70s. And one of the principal reasons for that is because the revolution of rock and roll that occurred in the 1970s, along with disco and everything like that, and the fact that the band was already drifting apart fairly significantly, would have led to one of two things. Either one, they would have all gone solo and would have reconvened sporadically for band projects that would have been heralded as awesome, but really wouldn't have worked out quite that way. They don't replicate their success in their latter days in this philosophy. Or secondly, they continue to go on and produce albums until John Lennon's death. John Lennon still dies. That's just how it works. Everyone says that Yoko Ono was one of the principal reasons why the Beatles suffered so much, and I tend to agree with them to a certain extent, but these were four individuals that were so huge that they almost had to go solo. You know, it was just something that had to happen. And really, rock and roll history would have been very... I think rock and roll history would have not been altered all of that much if they stuck around until the mid-70s. I don't think we would have had any more groundbreaking albums. I think those days were probably behind them simply because of all the kind of the bad blood within the band, if you'd want to call it bad blood, all of the conflict. But thoughts on Tony Martin era Sabbath. What the hell album was it? Was it the Crimson Idol? Or Cross? It was Cross Purposes. I really, really liked Tony's work on Cross Purposes a lot. I remember I was listening to that whenever I was in college, and it wasn't in my room. It was in one of my my dorm mates' rooms, and that was the only Sabbath album that he owned. And I was floored by Tony's work. "Addicted to Love" is a great song. I think isn't it "Addicted to Love"? I think is the title of the track. But what if Kurt Cobain never died? I've played this game before. I've also played the "What if Andy Wood never died" game before. In fact, I did that whenever I reviewed Mother Love Bone's Apple. I said that if Andy Wood doesn't die, they end up being more culturally significant than Kurt Cobain. I think that pissed some people off. I found Andy to be a better songwriter, but Cobain was the better icon. Kurt Cobain doesn't die. Ended up being one anyway. Sometimes you don't want to be. What if Kurt Cobain didn't die? I don't think that's a fair one. That would be one that would be almost impossible for me to touch because Kurt Cobain died by his own hands. Kurt Cobain made the decision to end his life. But if he didn't make that choice, first of all, the Foo Fighters don't happen. Not until later. Like, we're probably right now talking about the Foo Fighters' like second or third album, because I think the Foo Fighters eventually happened. Probably not under that name, though. Because if I remember, that name was kind of just, it was formulated because of something that Dave read about or something. It was sort of like a happy accident, because it sounds like a joke whenever you listen to it. You know, whenever you listen to the name Foo Fighters, whenever it hits your skull, it sounds sort of like a joke. But I still think that Nirvana ends up breaking up probably by the end of the 90s, and it's if it's not because of Kurt wanting to kill himself, it's because of burnout. I still think that grunge ends up grinding to a halt. It may get another year or two, so you're talking like 1997, but then it was already being overtaken by, you know, alternative rock or rock pop, you know, whatever you want to call it. And then new metal, whenever bands like Korn and Limp Bizkit and stuff broke onto the scene, it had a real mess there. I would say that, you know, Nirvana probably would have had another one or two albums, and then there's probably a split, or if anything, Kirk decides to leave. I don't think that you have too much of an alteration of history there. I think grunge still suffers mightily. Soundgarden's still going to end up breaking up. Alice in Chains will still break up. I mean, grunge is still crippled. Now, if all that didn't happen for God knows what reason, grunge would just sort of fade a little bit. Because once again, I think that nu metal and heavier alternative was just something that was so powerful whenever it came out in the latter part of the 90s that it was impossible to really ignore. Similar to how grunge was so powerful in the first part of the decade that it was impossible to ignore and essentially silence glam metal. Speaking of glam metal, there will be a new Relevant or Ridiculous coming within the next couple of days that speaks on whether or not glam metal is relevant or ridiculous. I'm not going to disclose the answer to that question in this chat, but you'll definitely want to tune in for that. It's going to be an interesting discussion considering I like some glam metal stuff, but I really think that everybody blames grunge a little too much for glam metal's destruction, when all that really happened to glam metal was that its time in the spotlight ended. And glam metal really didn't react very well with that, at least in my opinion. What if Breaking Benjamin never broke up? You have probably another 1 or 2 albums. You don't have this new album because they never broke up. So you have this album worth of songs with the original band. There you go. What if Lars Ulrich never moved to America? You probably don't have Metallica at all. You don't have Metallica at all. What if Adam Gontier never left 3 Days Grace? Then we don't have Santa Sonia. And a lot more people still like 3 Days Grace because I hear that a lot of people really, really freaking hate that new album. One guy that I communicate with on my personal page, we talk a lot about writing and a little bit about music. He did a review on his channel, whose name I can't remember, and that makes me feel awful. And he just ripped this thing to shreds. It's the dude from My Darkest Days. Porn Star Dancing was a good enough track, but it wasn't because of the vocals. It really was. It was not because of the vocals. It was mainly because I remember I heard it on the radio. It had it had a fun enough vibe to it where you knew it was going to be a hit. Zakk Wylde was on it, which was really cool, and Ludacris was on. I think it was Ludacris that was on the remix, or is that a Ludacris or Fabulous? It was one of those guys that have a lust at the end of their name. And this is the tale of Minnie the Moocher. Anyway, I know that's Cab Calloway.
Murph and the Magic Tones.
Listen, if Murph and the Magic Tones had one hit, it was getting hit out of the club. Anyway, name that reference, Murph and the Magic Tones. Name that reference, Murph and the Magic Tones, for bonus points. What if Varg never went to jail? More churches get burnt and more people die. No, he eventually will go to jail. And he may eventually go to jail again. Who knows? His beard, however, remains the same. The beard remains the same. In the new 3 Days Grace album, the lyrics were the funniest shit ever. He repeats the words over and over, and it gets predictable and funny throughout the entire album. Funny that you should mention that. Pac-Man Biohazard. There's a band out there that everyone loves, and I do too, that did that exact same thing with an album. And it worked for them, principally because, musically speaking, it was solid as a motherfucker. Do you know who that is? I'll tell you who that is. Who is it? System of a Down. System of a Down did that with Aerials. System of a Down did that with a majority of that album. And But all of the singles, you can definitely see that. And you know what? It worked so well. It worked so damn well that it didn't matter. But that's the thing. They were able to do that because their music was captivating. I did not see 3 Days Grace having that potential, because 3 Days Grace, to me, I feel like most of the fan base was based around Adam Gontier's voice. I don't feel that the band really was one of the stimulating factors for folks.
Songwriting.
Their musicality and their overall structure and design, it was exactly as you said, Pac-Man Biohazard, very predictable. And I think that proves it. Try whistling this. You win bonus points. Blues Brothers. Very nice. Very nice. What if Dead and Euronymous were still alive and playing for Mayhem? Masudo, I like that question a lot. I think we're going to go with that one. Dead and Euronymous were still alive and playing for Mayhem. First of all, Dead. It's really confusing. It's really funny. Wow. I think Dead eventually dies. Like, it just happens.
He's dead.
Dead had no real intent to continue living for all of that long. Maybe they get another Mayhem release out, a new studio record out before he does it. I think Dead is gone, one way or the other. But Euronymous, on the other hand, I think is largely important to black metal. I think he becomes a really critical voice to where black metal has gone. And the one problem that I have with this entire conundrum, but I think it's easily solved, is that if Euronymous is still alive and playing in Mayhem, they don't have the sound that you hear with Esoteric Warfare or one half of Ordo EKO. So this new, like, really eerie, strange sound that you're getting out of Mayhem, I don't think happens, because I feel that Euronymous would be way too critical of that and feel that it goes against a little bit of what the first wave of black metal was all about. But like I said, there's a simple solution. I think Euronymous ends up out of Mayhem, and then the question becomes whether or not Euronymous becomes either a member of another band or forms his own. And if I were to hazard a guess, I'd say he forms his own. As for Varg ends up not going to jail because of Euronymous. He ends up going to jail for church burnings, which means he has a shorter sentence. So you get rid of probably 2 of the ambient Burzum albums, and then Burzum comes back earlier than expected, and their career kind of just, it's a wavery career to really say the least already. But now you have more of a chance for him to speak with more people and encounter more folks in the black metal community. Maybe he's not as affected in jail, where his thoughts are still going to be warped. But maybe Euronymous and Varg end up in a project together if that happens, and then they go on a rampage and both die. Who knows? That would be one that would require a shitload of thought. What if Syd Barrett never left Pink Floyd? Ken. Oh. Syd Barrett. Pink Floyd would have not been the band that they were. They had prestige, minor prestige, with the 2 albums he was on. But you wouldn't have Dark Side of the Moon. You would definitely not have Wish You Were Here. Wish You Were Here, forget about that album. That's your favorite Floyd album, not the fuck anymore. Because if Syd Barrett's in that band, that album never occurs. The Wall, forget it. Animals, doubt it. Ummagumma, probably. A little bit of a closer chance for Ummagumma to occur. I see Pink Floyd not being a legendary band. Pink Floyd becomes a group that is a keynote aspect or facet of the psychedelic movement longer than they've already. See, they're associated with the psychedelic movement rather incorrectly in the 1970s, mainly because their work, even though people have conceived that as this the cornerstone of psychedelic rock and stuff like that, if you listen to a lot of true note psychedelic rock from the late 1960s, the stuff Floyd has done doesn't hold a candle to it. It's tame. It's very tame. But Floyd ends up a band that maintains the psychedelic tones that they had from their first two records. And that's about it. I see them as a group that probably fades into obscurity by the late 70s, early 80s. And that's a shame. Whoever asked that question, shame on you. I'm kidding. Guns N' Roses, Slash, Duff, and Tyler Izzy stay. What happens after Spaghetti? We still wait 12 damn years for Chinese Democracy, and guess what? It still sucks. And Axl Rose still doesn't save individuals' lives and is an angel. He still gets fat, too. Okay, that one's a little bit predisposed by anger. If they actually stay, I think Chinese Democracy still takes a long time to appear. And I have a feeling that it would not be called Chinese Democracy. I have a feeling that somebody would look at Axl Rose and be like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. Either that or they could be completely behind it. It's a cool name. It has gotten bad association based around the length of time. It's kind of like the Duke Nukem Forever of music, where you have to wait 12 years for it, and then whenever you get it, you're just like, this is balls. I thought this would be awesome, but it wasn't. Buckethead tried its best on that record, and it's like an album where there's 6 good songs out of 14, I want to say, and the ones that aren't good just suck. It's not the worst album I've ever heard in my entire life, but it's pretty bad. But I think Chinese Democracy comes a little sooner, maybe 6 years or so, and I think it's better. I think it's a better album if that happens, simply because it isn't one that has such a built-in expectation to it, where there's not as much pressure, for one, and for two, that influence that the group has on one another, and that little bit of songwriting friendliness that they have, where they do make some hits and stuff like that, leads the album to have a little bit more to offer to the commercial side of things, which is very important with Guns N' Roses. Most people wonder why Chinese Democracy is lauded so much. It's because the commercial side was not fulfilled whatsoever. What if Slash actually joined Poison? Then Poison becomes a supergroup, and Poison becomes a powerhouse. That album reviewer guy. Because in this situation, they don't lose anybody, in my opinion. You throw Slash in there and you transform. They're like Iron Maiden of glam metal in that case. Now you have multiple guitar players, and now they have the ability to do all sorts of kooky shit. Their solos become legendary and there's duels. I would see there being guitar solo duels in Poison. What if the Rev from Avenged Sevenfold didn't die? He'd still be in the band. That's about it. Mike Portnoy would not have to have been on Nightmare. Not saying that that's a bad thing, but Nightmare also doesn't happen. Not the way in which it is from today. The Nightmare album that so many people praise today doesn't happen. It takes a very different marked tone. And the very final track on that album, I don't think happens either. And that's probably one of the best Avenged Sevenfold songs that are out there. It's a beast. And I also think that if he doesn't die, that Hail to the King ends up a little bit different. I think they still adopt a simpler sound. I don't think that changes all of that much. But I don't think you see songs such as, I think it's called Planets, the second half of that album, which actually explores a lot of harmony and shit. I don't see that happening. But what if Manowar never formed? We would all die, Shane Ackerfields. Because without Manowar, where would we get our cheese from? Where would we get our cheese from? And we are all warriors of the world, after all. What if Yoko Ono never met John Lennon? John Lennon doesn't get shot. I'm throwing that out there. Don't even give a fuck. I don't think John Lennon gets as deep into the whole like save the world shit. Like, I think he becomes concerned about the planet, you know, and they still are part of the movements that they're a part of, but I don't think he dies. I don't think they do, you know, what was it, a bed in or whatever, a sleep in, where they were freaking naked inside their hotel room, weren't going to leave their bed, whatever the fuck that was. I don't think that happens. Double fantasy doesn't happen. Beatles actually may not break up. There's a potential. There's a potential that the situation that we talked about earlier actually comes true, because there is a large subsection, as I said, that believe that Yoko Ono is the reason why the Beatles broke up. And there's actually there's some damn good evidence to support that whenever you look at the timeline. But that's a rough one. But I would say that John Lennon does not die. What if Scott Stapp of Creed wasn't an asshole? We needed Scott Stapp to be an asshole. Pac-Man. We needed Scott Stapp to be an asshole so we could have Alter Bridge. Alter Bridge is a good thing. What if Hendrix didn't die? You get more albums from him. You get some cool collabs, probably, with other guitar players or other bands. He guests on a lot of work. Maybe he guests on a Zeppelin song. How cool would that be? You never know. That would be a neat one to tackle. But I don't feel like this alters all of that much, because Hendrix's legend had already built to the stage where he influenced a whole entire generation of guitar players and still influences people to this day. His remainder on this planet actually probably doesn't affect that all that much. Because even if everything that he releases after his death, you know, anything that came after that was utter shit, that early work would still have enough of an influence on individuals where you still have the next generation. That's why I think a lot of people are worried about music these days, is because they don't think there's enough individuals like Jimi Hendrix and stuff like that to really influence the next generation. I think it's bullshit. You know, I think they're just influencing the next generation in some different ways. Either that, they're not listening to the right bands. You know, they're thinking that the guitarist from 3 Days Grace is going to influence the next generation. And everybody's going to want to be their singer. What's this fuck from My Darkest Days? All of a sudden, all the vocalists from Tomorrow are going to want to cover that Porn Star Dancing song. John Bonham never dies. Do Zeppelin falter in the 1980s? I say yes, because they would have struggled among the rise of new wave dance and glam. Led Zeppelin still breaks up right around the same time that John Bonham dies, because that was something that was pretty much in the cards anyway. John Bonham dying officially solidified the fate of Led Zeppelin, but the group was already considering splitting. So I hate saying that John Bonham's death, all it affected was how quickly Led Zeppelin decided to part ways. That's kind of the truth. It kind of is the truth. Now, of course, the difference is that if John Bonham is still alive, I think that you have a much better chance, in the 1990s, mind you, of a Led Zeppelin reunion. Why not in the 1980s, you may wonder, because I think that it would take some time in order for that to truly be not only a reunion, but memorable. What if In Flames stayed true to their sound after Clayman, says SOS Scorn? This one kind of is a strange battle of good versus evil, in my opinion, because everything that they were doing was really building toward what happened with albums such as Reroute to Remain. Because if you listen to Clayman, even though it had a little bit more of that twinge of the 90s In Flames, it actually was sort of signaling a signpost that this band was going to be probably doing some things a little bit differently. One of the main things that happened with Reroute to Remain was that it was almost like overnight they became sensations and everyone knew about this group, and still people tend to not recognize their early work. It's almost like people who listen to Catatonia and refuse to recognize their earliest albums, such as Dance of December Souls, or people that refuse to believe that Anathema at one point were growlers. I think if Reroute to Remain doesn't happen, you actually get a couple less people in the metal. So it does have its positive benefit. It really does. And I feel that In Flames switching to that sound may have actually provoked some individuals, or is provoking some individuals, to really consider melodic death metal as a huge reason to get into the genre. There was a big mellow death explosion of bands during the first portion of the 2000s and the mid portions of the 2000s that many people don't know about, principally because they never made it past one or two albums, either that or it really didn't pick up steam. It was almost like a rebirth of the original Gothenburg scene, only with a more stripped down sound that didn't take off, mainly because it was in direct competition with metalcore. And metalcore, of course, did very, very well. So if they don't do that, if they continue on the same pathway as Clayman, Melodeath maintains its strength, and actually some of those Melodeath bands that formed, they might become failed forerunners of a simpler form of Melodeath, either that or we instead get bands that stick to the more Melodeath construct and try to employ some tighter songwriting. It's really hard to say. The Castle Boss and Anathema are probably one of the most drastic change in sound examples out there. I agree. You hear that with them. You hear that with Catatonia, as I mentioned. You hear that obviously now with Opeth. A lot of people are just pissy about that, but they shouldn't be, because Opeth's prog stuff is amazing. But don't forget Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost is not mentioned in a lot of those conversations because they've, of course, reverted back. Think of how Amorphous sounded for a while there. Especially in the latter 1990s, early 2000s, where it was very clean vocal dominated and you didn't hear the growls as much. They've, of course, had multiple vocalists to sustain that, so that one makes a little bit more sense. But what if Neil Peart never joined Rush? They would sound very different. Remember that they were a classic rock band, or a band that sounded a lot like a classic rock band before Peart, and they still maintained a little bit of that philosophy after he joined, mainly on choice tracks. But you miss a lot with Neil Peart not being in that group. You miss a lot with that. The one thing that I find incredible is that within that whole foray and fracas of the progressive rock movement of the 1970s, Rush's lineup remained largely unchanged. So I think an even better question is what would happen if, for whatever reason, I don't know, what would happen if there was some sort of trade-off with Steve Hackett, or some strange trade-off with Peter Gabriel? Like, what if after Peter Gabriel left Genesis, he joined Rush? You might wonder why. Why would he do that? That's the beauty of the what if game. What if Peter Gabriel joined Rush after leaving Genesis and not going solo? I mean, then you have some Rush albums, first of all, that don't happen. Moving Pictures doesn't happen if that occurs. Principally because one of the main reasons why Peter went solo is to have control over his own music and his own spectacle and kind of do his own thing. But I think you would see a very strange version of Rush going around. And I think that their live shows, which are already spectacles, would still be spectacles, but I think it would be very off-putting. It would be strange. But if there's one thing that I will say is that Rush's sound actually does harbor a lot of potential for theatrics. If you think of some of the great songs that they have done that speak a lot about not only the record industry, but just economics in general, or or if you consider some of their 70s material, imagine Peter Gabriel getting a hold of some of their like 2112, for example. Imagine him getting a hold of 2112 and getting a stage spectacle set in his mind for that. Imagine how ridiculous that would be. Imagine how just crazy sinister that would be. That'd be just a really interesting idea. Hello, Eric Metalhead. What's going on? What if Carolina beat Detroit in the 2002 Stanley Cup Finals? It wasn't going to happen. You're living in a dream world, sir. Living in a dream world. Red Wings were going to crush him regardless. Would be kind of interesting, though, because of Carolina was a pretty solid team, but they were not expected to be there. They weren't expected to be there. Oh, man. I feel like Castlebowski said something about their new stuff. I feel like Ghost are perhaps doing a better job of what Opeth has been trying to do with their last couple of albums. That's not harsh. That's not harsh at all. Ghost's sound is really becoming one of its kind. I feel that Ghost's sound has morphed from their first album now to this third to really embody a lot of that 70s prog along with occult metal. And their spectacle. Let's think about this just for a second. Think about how simplistic the music of Kiss was. And think about how that music was amplified 10,000 times because of the spectacle. Think about how important that Kiss is to modern music culture. And a lot of people will say, well, I really don't like Kiss. Doesn't matter. They had a huge impact on rock and roll and heavy metal. Like it or not. Now imagine what Ghost is doing right now. Imagine how many people they have been captivating over the course of these last couple of albums. If you think about Kiss, it took one song for them to become massive. And one song became two songs. Two songs became three. And as you can see, one thing kind of leads to another. And Kiss is arguably considered to be one of the greatest rock and roll bands of all time that I consider to be wildly overrated, but one man's opinion. Imagine if, for Ghost, Cersei had been that song. Let's say that after Cersei busted out on the YouTube, which, by the way, I saw in ads for gaming videos. I mean, there's a lot of promo for this album. There's a lot of promo for this album, for Meliora. But imagine if Cersei all of a sudden breaks onto the radio and people were requesting this left and right, they become huge. That's all it would take. They have the live spectacle to captivate. They have the live spectacle to captivate. The subject matter is going to certainly alienate some folks right off of the bat. You know, the thought of having a deranged, demented pope is no doubt going to sort of cause a couple people to scratch their heads a little bit, like, what the hell did I just get myself into? But whenever you also think about it, Gene Simmons was called the fucking demon, yo. That's all I'm going to say. He wasn't called Demon Yo. He was just called a demon, but you know what I mean. And you know that every single Kiss fan isn't, you know, an anarchist or, you know, an atheist or Buddhist or Pastafarian. You know, most people back then thought, oh, pasta, sounds delicious. They're not thinking, pasta. Hi, God, how you doing? That's all it would take. They have the sound where it could captivate people. Why it hasn't happened, I think, is really a showcase as to why the 1970s and 2015 is really, really different. Really, really different. What if the term gent never got as big as it did today? Those bands still exist. Periphery still exists. Tesseract still exists. Chip's Banner still exists. It's just termed under. It's just probably termed under progressive, like a form of progressive metal. You know, I need to check on this ball game. 6-5 Pirates pull it off. Hells to the yeah. Scott Van Slyke is a douchebag, though, for making it 6-5. Loved his father, Andy, whenever he played for the Pirates in the late 80s and early 1990s. He's one of my favorite players. Before anybody asks, I do love sports, and I'm a pretty big fan. We've only done one sports-related video on this channel, for good reason. I could yak about sports for a long time. What if Byzantine frontman Chris left the band? I would be sad. Chris is a really cool guy. Byzantine is from, they're not very far away from where I live. They're in West Virginia. But they used to play Morgantown, which is about 30 minutes to the south of me all the time. Used to see him a good bit. What if Lemmy died before forming Motorhead? That's freaking morbid. No Motorhead, I guess. I think that there are some bands that would not happen. There are some famous quotes that certainly wouldn't happen. The whole, who would win a fight between Lemmy and God? Trick question, Lemmy is God. That joke would be gone. I can still remember about 15 years ago being in a Saturday matinee, which is an offshoot of FYE in the latter part of the 90s and the 2000s. It was a movie store exclusively. I remember being in there and some douche nozzle decided to crack that joke with me, and I just kind of looked at him like, wow, what are you, fucking 7? No Motorhead would be rough. But like I said, the one thing that is true about that is that influence would be a bit different. You'd probably hear a little bit of a marked difference in the tone of early thrash metal. And rock and roll by itself would have a little bit of an effect as well. That dirty side would have to be handled by somebody else. But, if there's no Motorhead, it's not like everyone's collectively mourning Motorhead. It's instead something where it's grabbed by somebody else and they take the ball. The funny thing about this game is that if you eliminate a band, there's a potential that another band could actually take their place in the importance factor. Similar to saying that if the Beatles only lasted until 1963, and maybe not had their, Beatlemania was it. Would they still be considered one of the most important bands of all time? Or if the Beatles never existed, would it be the Rolling Stones? Would it be the Who? That is considered one of the most important bands of all time. Would it be the Kinks? Would it be the Doors? These are all bands that are still considered within that pantheon. But how does that toss up the supposed obvious rankings? Because it's not as obvious as you think. That's where the subjective nature of things really comes into play. I, for one, love the Doors. Absolutely love the Doors. Somebody else out there loves the Kinks. My former manager loved the Kinks. Huge fan of the Kinks. They would have never surpassed the Beatles or the Who in that regard, in his mind. But they were right up there in his top 3, along with who else? Along with Cheap Trick. Cheap Trick was high up on his list, and there was one other band that. The fact that I can't think of it right now is just, it's a sin that I forget who it is, but oh well. It has been about 6 months since I've talked with them, so that's definitely where that comes from. Cliff Burton not dying and the effect on Metallica and heavy music in the 1990s. We talked a little bit about Metallica already. But if we, just to kind of breeze over this a little bit, we're going to submit for the approval to the Midnight Society that everything is the way that it was up until the point of Cliff's death. And Cliff doesn't die. Instead, he's just injured. First of all, And Justice for All doesn't happen. Probably because he is injured, and that kind of stalemates things for a little bit, which means they don't work with Bob Rock until later. Black Album may never happen. Or if it does, it may be a year later. And Jason Newsted stays in Flotsam and Jetsam. And I think Flotsam and Jetsam actually becomes bigger. It's so strange to think that his impact, him leaving Flotsam and Jetsam, just sort of made them forgotten. It's almost insulting. Because Eric A.K. is a great singer. Eric A.K. is a fucking awesome singer. And they have good chops. They're a decent, they're a really good band. But Jason Newsted leaves, and for some strange reason, everyone just is like, well, fuck, he's gone. Why are they still making music? What the fuck are they doing? Bunch of morons. They should just kill themselves. It's ridiculous. Really underrated and underappreciated. Maybe that's not the case if Jason Newsted remains with them. Aside from that, I think that Cliff would probably... I don't think he'd be as on board as everybody was with Bob Rock. I think the music would sound a little different, obviously. But it's really odd to think about that. Robert Trujillo or whatever never joined the band, and oh well, I like him, but whatever. What if Kirk died instead of Cliff? If it was going to be anybody, it was going to be Lars. If it was going to be anybody, I think it was going to be Lars. But if Kirk died, whew, I don't know. That's rough because at that time, thrash was still pretty big. So to get another guitarist, that takes something, Think about how Ozzy's band diminished from Randy Rhodes to Jake E. Lee. And saying that that's a diminishment is kind of an insult to Jake E. Lee, but by comparison with their chops, Jake wasn't as good, and then you get Zakk Wylde, and it's kind of, it fits like a glove. Jake E. Lee wasn't really suited for that band, in my opinion. What if the PMRC never happened? Rock and Roll Corner, I have an interesting discussion about that. It's short. But the couple with Cliff's, with all of that and everything, it would probably been Lars that would have been the one who died. And if that would have happened, replacing a drummer in those days was also hell. So I don't know if it would have been a replacement. That might have actually ended the band. I think the only reason Metallica didn't end whenever Cliff died was because everybody felt that Cliff would have wanted the band to go on. And he was that type of individual where he was going to guide them to success, which of course ended up happening. It's great whenever you say that and it ends up being true, but whatever. If the PMRC never happens, I think metal's impact on the latter portion of the 1980s is a little bit more subdued. I think the PMRC helped heavy music and helped rap music. The PMRC wanted to really put a dent into all that stuff. I think the opposite is what happened. I think the opposite is what happened. You know why? Whenever it comes to youth, if you see that parental advisory sticker on an album, what does it make you want to do? If it's something that you want it all the more. You want it all the more. Why do 10-year-olds play Grand Theft Auto? Not only it's because their parents allow them to do so, but it's also because it's something where you get to enter this alternate universe where you can drive over people and shoot things and ride a helicopter and crash it into a building and pretend you're Tony fucking Montana from, goddamn Scarface and do this and that. In reality, if I'm going to challenge, if there's any GTA executive out there, here's a free idea for you. Grand Theft Auto 6, secret mission, the last chase scene from the Blues Brothers. Throwing that out there. By the way, if you're gamers and you think that doing that mission would be easy, you're freaking retarded.
You gotta avoid the Nazis and the police.
You have to avoid police. You have to avoid Nazis. You have to navigate Chicago. Best of luck. Oh my. Yeah, the PMRC wasn't trying to get rid of a type of music or anything like that. It was more so about content. But that's, again, what I mean. It was something that I feel helped, in particular, heavy metal and rap. You know, it was something that was very helpful without its intent to be. You know, obviously its intent wasn't to stymie things. It was a little bit more regulatory. But based around all of the rhetoric and based around this and that, it ended up helping metal and shit a little bit more than anything else. Evil thought with thrash never happening. Why would you do that? No. Thrash happens. That episode will never happen. It is GTA Pac-Man, but if there is one thing that I will cite about that particular chase sequence is that your problem isn't so much not running people over, it's more so the terrain. Because if you've seen that flick, that car that they're in is demolished throughout the course of that. You know, you have to essentially weave through different bridges and underpasses. You have to avoid a bunch of different people, and then somehow, some way, I would love to see them incorporate the part where they end up hanging on the edge of the drawbridge and then backing up, where you have to do that. Like, this is something where the devs of the game would have to be dicks. You know, I've always wondered how I would be as a developer of a game, and I realized that I would be a total asshole and people would hate my games because they would be uncompromising. Maybe not so much in the fact that I would spawn too many enemies or do all sorts of dickish things like that, but more so just in, if I were to make something like that as an Easter egg, I would want it to be as authentic as possible. What if Bruce never left Maiden, and what if Bruce never joined Maiden? That's going to be our last topic of the night. For an important reason. Iron Maiden's new single will be released this Friday. I will be, hopefully, the first person to review it. So you're going to want to be here on Friday. You are going to want to be here on Friday. Not only to listen to the song, but to hear the review. My goal with this review is for it to be huge. I need your help in order for that to happen. Oh, okay, wait a minute. Before we do the Bruce never left Maiden, Bruce never joined Maiden, the final topic, we're going to do one more from Christian Fruins, who says, I saw your Mayhem video, but I can't remember if you said it or not, but what if Kevin Lyman never made those remarks about metal? Does Mayhem die? Yes. Mayhem was still going to die because of attendance sales. The attendance was not enough for them to qualify. It's something where those last shows took a hit, but I think the death knell was already firmly inserted into the wrists and into the feet. The stigmata was already there, and right now they just were waiting for it to bleed out. The comments didn't help. The comments certainly enhanced it and definitely didn't make it a prolonged death. It became almost something that was inevitable. But it still happens. So let's go back to our final topic of the night. And that is, what if Bruce Dickinson never joins Maiden, or what if Bruce Dickinson joins Maiden but never leaves in the 1990s to usher in the Blaze Bayley era? What happens? First of all, if Bruce Dickinson never joins Iron Maiden, they do get another singer, because this is a band that was not going to die, but Iron Maiden does not become the powerhouse that they become. Because unfortunately, Paul Di'Anno was not going to have the voice, the chops, or even if he did do the attempts on tracks from Number of the Beast, Peace of Mind, Power Slave, even if that's where the writing would have gone, which is doubtful, those songs would have sounded markedly different, or they'd be a markedly different band if Paul Di'Anno maintained themselves as a band. But like I said, they could have easily gotten another singer, a different singer. Maybe you have a different result, maybe you don't. Where you go? Oh, over here. I was going to say, I might need my co-pilot here in a couple of minutes. Not right now. But at any rate, let's focus more so on what happens if Bruce doesn't leave in the 90s. First of all, I still believe that we have large gaps of time between Maiden records in the 1990s because Bruce, I feel, would still want to focus on his solo career. He still would want to focus a little bit on that. I don't think you get the X Factor at Virtual 11. The X Factor's a shame, by the way, because I actually include that as pretty high on my list of favorite Maiden albums. I think that is a really underappreciated album. He has, Blaze Bayley, that is, really did a phenomenal job with that disc. Virtual 11, though, half was good, half sucked, so it was only half of a mistake, I guess. But if Bruce doesn't leave, you don't get, I think, those albums. You may get some songs from it. I don't know if the X Factor is as underappreciated of a gem if he's still with them, but I also don't believe that it's as good. And I know that sounds sinful. But it's the truth. Virtual 11 would probably be the opposite. It ends up being a better album than it was. But one of the biggest problems that I have with Bruce never leaving Maiden is the fact that whenever Brave New World comes out, it probably doesn't. It's probably different. It's probably something that's markedly different. Because Brave New World just sounds so much like not only a heralding cry to the new millennium, but Brave New World almost sounds extremely significant because of Bruce Dickinson's return to the band. Almost like ushering in a Brave New World for Iron Maiden. And then there's, of course, the obvious reference to the novel, I was going to say the Huxley novel.
So,
yeah. But I feel that Blaze Bayley, on the other hand, could take an interesting path because he was with Wolfsbane. They weren't really picking up too much slack. So if Blaze, for example, goes solo earlier with his Blaze Bayley project, then maybe it's a little different. But if he never joins Maiden, Wolfsbane might break through, or they might end up fading into obscurity and the Blaze Bayley solo project starts early. I don't know. I don't like that timeline jump because right after Blaze left Maiden, albums like Silicon Messiah and The 10th Dimension, Blood and Belief come out from his solo project, which are all fantastic discs. I think you end up losing in this regard than you do win. Almost as though that that Bruce Dickinson needed to leave Maiden in order for us to sort of win in the end. Much like I feel that Rob Halford had to leave Judas Priest for us to win in the end because Ripper Owens. Although I'd be more curious to and more willing to allow Rob Halford remain in Judas Priest simply because I want to see where the hell Winter's Bane would have gone. Because Heart of a Killer, that's a fucking awesome album. So Winter's Bane were already writing really good music. But ladies and gents, that will probably do it. That will probably do it right now. As I said, the reason why we sort of brought this all up is because it has the potential to be a series. It has the potential to be something that we explore, something that we do on this channel. And it would be one where I would probably not include my face in front of the camera as much. Obviously, I'd have to record my voice, but that wouldn't be that'd be about it. Now, for those of you who are here which there are only 30. I find that hard to believe. I find that impossible to believe. But it's accurate. How about that? Oh, wow. It's kind of a small number. I'm probably not, I shouldn't be so surprised considering that there was so much conflict earlier about whether or not this was even going to happen. But top right-hand corner of the screen, you see a little button where there would traditionally be a card that would show up. Maybe it is showed up on your screen. I don't know. I'm not you. It's fan funding. We have it. It's available. You can do it right from that card. And I would thank you so much if you did. But I need to, before I sign off, I need to say hello to somebody. Thank you. We have Mittens here. Hey, bud. Hey, buddy. What's going on, pal? The great Mittens. I need to get some footage of Mittens very soon before he destroys his other toy, because he's had some pretty noted battles with them. But there's Mittens right there. I'm going to let him go do his thing. I think he would hang out a little bit more if it was during the day, like he did during the 24-hour stream. This is so weird. I'm watching myself in the past, and Mittens just showed up. This is so strange. Say hello.
Yeah. Hi. I was watching Mittens.
Of course you were. All right, ladies and gents, ladies and germs, peoples of the universe, I'm out of here. But I would like for you guys to do something for me, since you guys are so awesome as it stands. In order to spread the word about this potential series, this video will no doubt go up very, very soon after I click the end stream button. Whenever it does, I would like for you guys to come in here and start posting some of your what-if scenarios. And also post that you want this to become a series. If you do, obviously. If you don't, if you think it's stupid, then obviously put that. But I would like those over here. And that'd be awesome. I thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm coverkillernation. This is some girl that I know.
Oh, yeah, okay, thanks.
Some cat that I hang out with was just here. That was pretty cool. This is some phone that I own. These are my glasses. I have eyes. It's weird, right? I'll talk to you guys later. Wow, these are warm. I'm out of here. Maybe, eventually.